Hello and welcome to the CircuitPython weekly meeting for June 22nd, 2020. I'm Scott and I work for Adafruit on CircuitPython along with, of course, Hierophect chats with me right when I start. I work for Adafruit on CircuitPython. CircuitPython is an easy to use version of Python designed for hardware. We CircuitPython development is sponsored by Adafruit. I think my goal with this introduction is just to prove to Jeff that he's ready to do it by all the things that I'm failing at. CircuitPython support is CircuitPython development is supported by Adafruit. So support Adafruit by going to adafruit.com and buy some stuff there. It improves everything for us. And everybody's talking to me once I start streaming or recording, not streaming. This meeting happens every Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Everybody is welcome to join. It's an audio-only meeting in the CircuitPython channel on the Adafruit Discord. You can join the Adafruit Discord by going to adafru.it/discord. Hop in there. We're there all week. We'd love to have you. This meeting is 5 parts. It tends to run an hour to an hour and a half, depending on how many folks we have in it. The first part we have is community news, which is kind of an overview of all things on the interwebs that are CircuitPython related, and credit for that section goes to Anne, who puts that together every week, and we'll get into more of that later. After that, we have the state of CircuitPython, its libraries, and Blinka, which is a kind of statistics overview of the project meant to ground us in the realities of the numbers. If you think that the numbers don't reflect what you think CircuitPython that are important to CircuitPython are, let us know. We can always change the metrics that we look in that section, but it's meant to ground us in kind of facts in terms of like how things are going. After that, we have kind of the opposite of facts, but hug reports, which is a section where everyone is given a chance to say thank you to other folks within the community for the work that they've been doing. And seems silent at the moment, but you can hear me, I think, right? So during hug reports, everyone's given a chance. We do it as a round robin. Thank you, Anne. That means that I will start and we'll go through the list of the folks in the voice channel, giving everybody a chance to speak. If you don't want to speak, like a bunch of people in the chat have been saying already, let us know you're lurking, and then we'll just skip over you. It's no big deal. And if you have notes but do not want to speak, you can always put those in the notes doc. That is a running Google Doc that we edit as we go along. In that notes doc, I put time codes so that if folks are listening to this after the fact, they can then seek through the video or the audio to hear the parts that they care about. That implies, and of course, I should be explicit that we do record this meeting. So beware that the text CircuitPython chat and the voice chat is recorded from my end. After hug reports, we'll do status updates, which is done as a round robin as well. And we will each have a minute or two to talk about what we've been working on and what we plan on working in the coming week. And it's a great way for us to just get a broad idea of what is happening within the CircuitPython community. Lastly, we have a section called In the Weeds, which is a chance for us to just talk about whatever we want to talk about, mostly pertaining to CircuitPython. There's some questions and stuff that we debate there. And if you have topics for In the Weeds, please drop those in the notes doc before we get there so that we can have a pretty smooth transition. When we first used to do this, we would kind of like hit In the Weeds and just wait for people to say stuff in the chat, and that's just not super efficient. So hop in the notes doc and put stuff there. And that's how the meetings run. Everybody's welcome. We'd love to hear from you. And let's get started. I don't think I forgot anything, but maybe I did. Never know. So first up, we have the community news section. Let me take a time code. First and foremost, we're just realized this, and so we're just starting to advertise it. But happy birthday to the Adafruit Discord. Somebody was checking some member counts and stuff, and we noticed that the server was created June 21st of 2017. So It's been 3 years. Adafruit Discord's 3 years old, and thank you to everyone who has participated in making the Adafruit Discord the welcoming, booming place that it is. And Jeff points out that the cake emoji even has 3 candles. So this is like the golden birthday of Adafruit Discord, where the emoji matches your age, sort of thing. So thanks to everybody again for being a part of the Discord. Next up in community news, Anne has a number of things with. Oh, I should take a time code. Bluetooth is the highlight of the newsletter so far. Saying with active development of Bluetooth capabilities in CircuitPython, here's a spotlight on some of the recent community work. And one of them, I actually didn't copy the whole thing, so I'll just read a couple of these. One is iBeacons are Bluetooth Low Energy devices used in location awareness applications such as welcoming people as they arrive at an event or broadcasting information to compatible devices at a nearby museum exhibit. The term iBeacon is Apple's implementation of the technology and reportedly is what they use at their stores to send notifications to iPhone users as they enter and leave the store. There's also an example of controlling a Lego WeDo 2.0 wireless motor with Python and Bluetooth. And there's links there to EV3 Dev forum and YouTube. Lastly, there's also an HCI UART emulator, which is a very simple emulator for Bluetooth HCI UART transport, which is written in Python. HCI is kind of like the API for talking to Bluetooth devices, which is cool. Next up, and I really wanted to highlight this one, you can now sponsor Micropython on GitHub. So there's yet another way that we can sponsor upstream Micropython and the development that Damien and Jimo do. It says, become a sponsor of Micropython on GitHub, and funds will go to continued maintenance of the software, recruiting additional maintainers, and offering bounties for finding and fixing critical bugs. So visit their GitHub for more information. And I encourage everybody to do that. I think I'll go in and actually redirect some of my sponsorship dollars their way as well. Next up, Python is the third most beloved developer language in the 2020 Stack Overflow survey. So the text here is, in the 2020 Stack Overflow developer survey, Python slips to third place in the beloved category behind Rust and the surge in TypeScript to make TypeScript just a bit higher than Python. But again, I would encourage everybody to take the Stack Overflow developer survey with a grain of salt, and don't forget that Python really is a beginner-friendly language, and that's where our bread and butter is. We don't have to be everything to everyone. So keep that in mind when you look at the Stack Overflow. It's very interesting to see, but it's not the end-all be-all. Next up, and if you want to know more about my opinions on that, I did a talk at PyCascades where I kind of address it. Next up, the Hello Blink show, leading a developer community with Kattni Rembor, is posted as of today, which is super exciting. It says, in this episode of the Hello Blink show, Harris and Sean interview firmware developer, hardware designer, technical writer, and community leader Kattni Rembor. Kattni shares her insights into how she engages followers and educates her peers. Listeners will hear her advice as she delves into her experience with Adafruit and the process involved with fostering a community on learning CircuitPython. So I've already downloaded it. I've started listening to it. I'm excited to go for a walk later and finish listening to that. I'm sure it's awesome. And Kattni, thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Next up, we have something from Maker Melissa, a scrolling LED matrix sign, which is an awesome GIF that is in the note stock. So you can see that there. It's, I don't know how many panels long, a number of panels. It says CircuitPythonista Melissa LeBlanc-Williams has been working on a large multi-LED matrix display, 6 panels wide, super cool, nice and fluid with a like PCB background, which is super neat. So great job, Maker Melissa, with that. 2 more. First and foremost, I think this is right up C. Grover's alley, actually, but a number of folks could help out with this. New York is going to be doing some cheering for Pride, I believe, this weekend at 1 p.m. And Phil would like to create a song that involves folks cheering for Pride, I believe. And if you're interested and want to provide some cheering samples so use a audio recorder of some sort, and what you can do is you can email tom@adafruit.com, and he will use the samples that you send his way in this song. So if that sounds cool to you, please do that. We're not going to broadcast this super widely because we are a bit worried that some folks will abuse it. So you are a special group that we trust to ask for this. So send your cheers Tom's way. That would be awesome. And lastly, we have just a bit of a reminder that Adafruit is back open and shipping. So if you want to support the folks that are paid to work on CircuitPython, shop adafruit.com and help us out and continue this project going forward. So that's it for community news. I don't think I left anything super critical out. Next up, I should say before I move on, this part of the weekly always comes from the draft of the Adafruit Python for Microcontrollers newsletter that Anne leads up. And so thank you first and foremost to Anne for putting that together. And also, if you want to help Anne out, if you have CircuitPython projects that you maybe blogged up in the last week or you haven't seen end up in the newsletter, let Anne know. We'd love to show stuff off. And for those of you listening, you can email Anne, ANNEB@adafruit.com for all your hot tips on cool CircuitPython projects. Which actually also, it should be, the Tamagotchi thing from Caps Lock would be cool too. I don't know if you got that in there. But yeah, that was neat also. Okay. I'm glad I didn't forget that. Okay, next up, let's do state of CircuitPython libraries in Blinka. Anne says nope. Do you know what I'm talking about, or should I send you a link? The Tamagotchi stuff from Caps Lock. I'll talk about it in my Hug reports as well. Okay, let me just do it now. I'll post it if folks haven't seen it. Or maybe it was in last week's. Jen sent you. I can never remember how to get the link for. Okay, yeah, I think you got it. Yep. There's just an update to that. It's cool. Okay, for reals this time. State of CircuitPython libraries in Blinka. First off, overall, we had 17 pull requests merged. Let me take a step back. The point of this section is to give us a grounding in the stats of the projects. So you'll see both numbers of activity, but also numbers of people involved. And those are both important metrics. We had 17 pull requests merged from 9 different authors. Some new authors or names that I don't recognize are Buchan and Luke IQT. So thank you to those new folks. Thank you to everybody who authored pull requests this week. Really appreciate it. We had 10 reviewers, which is quite high for us, which is awesome. Thank you to everyone who's done reviewing. Remember that the number of authors that we can have scales with the number of reviewers. So that is super helpful if you want to get started. And Jeff points out that there was a translation PR that Fede2 Alvaro was also a part of. So thanks to Fede2 as well. Sometimes, depending on when we pull stats, they can slip through the cracks. So happy to highlight those things as well. Issues-wise, we had 17 closed issues by 9 people and 13 open by 12 people. So we're net down 4, which is awesome. I think the last couple of weeks we've been up a little, so it's great to see that us making some traction against those issues. And overall, I would say our community is growing a lot because people have time right now, which is awesome. CircuitPython, we've been having some discussions about renaming the I2C slave class, which may trigger us to go to 6.0. So if you have any API changes that you want to see happen soon. I think we may end up at CircuitPython 6.0 sooner rather than later. Let us know on that front. Um, I think similar to last time on the library side, we're starting to pick up again as we introduce new hardware, and the Blinka side just keeps growing and growing. And thank you to Melissa for steering that ship, which is a big ship. It's surprising how many people are using CircuitPython libraries on Raspberry Pi. Okay, that's overall. Now let me talk about a bit more detail of the stats for the core. In the core side, we had 4 pull requests merged from 4 different authors and 2 reviewers. So thank you to everyone involved there. We have 19 open pull requests, which is quite a lot, but the oldest is only 65 days old. We're not too far behind, which is great. So let's keep on top of that. It's cool to see the number of pull requests picking up, which is cool. Issues wise, we had 5 closed issues by 2 people and 5 open by 5 people, so we're net 0 for a total of 309 open issues. And the thing that I like to track the most is getting an idea of what our triage backlog is. And the best way that I know of to do that is by looking at the number of issues that are not assigned a milestone. And for this week, it is 13. So we're kind of keeping pace with the number of issues. We're not necessarily on top of it, but that tends to fluctuate a little bit with where we are in the release cycle. So basically, like right before we do a stable release, we want to be very diligent about looking at our issues, but otherwise, not so much. And that's it for the core. Let's kick it over to Kattni for the libraries.
Thanks, Scott. So this is over all of the CircuitPython libraries. We had 12 pull requests merged from 5 different authors and 8 reviewers, which is excellent. The oldest one that we merged in was 43 days. We had 4 of them that were at a week, and the rest were below that, which is good to see. And that leaves us with 33 open pull requests. We had 9 issues closed by 6 people and 7 open by 7 people, leaving us with 178 open issues. If you're interested in all of this information, you can head over to circuitpython.org/contributing. And if you are looking to contribute to CircuitPython, it's a great place to start. You'll find all of the open PRs, which you can pop in, take a look at, see if there's anything that you can test, see if there's anything you can look over, and just leave a comment and let us know what you found. That's always super helpful. And you'll find all of the open issues, and those are sortable by label, which we've been trying to be better about labeling everything. So if you're new to everything, you can do search for good first issue and find some stuff that might be at the level that you're looking for. Otherwise, most of them are bugs enhancements or documentation things. And you can take a look, see if anything interests you, leave a comment on that issue that you're going to be doing it, and go for it. We have a guide on working with Git and GitHub if you're new to that, and we're also always available to help. In terms of library updates, there were a number of updated libraries over the last week, but no new libraries. And that's where we are with the libraries.
Awesome. Thank you, Kattni. All right, let's go to Melissa for Blinka updates.
Hello. For Blinka, we had 1 pull request merged by 1 author and 1 reviewer. There is currently 1 open pull request, and there were 3 closed issues by 2 people and 1 open by 1 person, leaving a net of 24 open issues. And there have been 1,642 PyPI downloads in the last week, and we are currently supporting 52 boards.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah.
All right. That is it for State of CircuitPython libraries in Blinka. Next up, we have Hug Reports. Hug Reports is a chance for us to talk about and thank others for the work that they've been doing. If you are lurking, please let us know. Double check the note stock to make sure that we've noted it. That means that either you have written some text in here you'd like me to read off, or just are listening in. And otherwise, I will call on you and give you a chance to unmute your mic and talk to us about what you think is important and the work that folks have been doing. So I will start, and then we'll then we'll go around in the circle, in a circle, a circle on the list. All right, let me get going. I'm just like off today. Maybe we should just have Katney do it all the time. She does a much better job. Okay. First and foremost, a hug report to Foamy Guy for digging into display IO. I've been watching some discussions there, which has been awesome. Hug report to Fede2 for helping with CircuitPython and election cal translations, and also Learn Guide translations into Spanish, which are amazing. And I would love to see Adafruit content be more accessible to non-English speakers. So thank you for leading that. Next up, hug report to Caps Lock for the awesome Tamagotchi-inspired virtual pet. Very excited and interested to see how that is evolving and improving. And then lastly, we had some more discussions in the mod channel. We've been quite busy, and I just wanted to say thanks again to all of our awesome Discord mods. I was actually at my parents' house yesterday talking a bit about moderating an online community, and I think that they were kind of impressed how proactive that we take things. So thank you again to everybody for really stepping up, and let's all take care of each other and make sure that we're in it for the long term, because it can be taxing from time to time. So thank you everybody on that. Next up, let's go to V923Z.
Thanks, Jeff. So this week I have a group hug, and I would also like to thank the ever-busy Jeff Appler for helping out with the documentation stubs. I still have a couple of questions, but he pointed me in the right direction. So thanks, Jeff.
Awesome. Thank you. Anne is lurking, so we'll go to Brent.
Hello. A few hug reports this week. Hug report to Scott for documentation of digital I/O and analog I/O and the API design for CircuitPython. I've read through it a lot before. I think a lot of us have, but I'm working on a project which implements a similar API, and I've been taking a different look at how it's written, and it's written and designed incredibly well. Also to Scott for pointing me towards protocol buffers when I was looking for a way to serialize a lot of data that's also extensible, and I'm enjoying writing it more than JSON, which is really weird for me. Jeff for NTP discussion, I learned about time deltas, which I never learned about. And Jerry for working on reducing the code size of the RFM9X libraries to make hardware accessible over a period of time, which is great.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent. All right, Carter and C. Grover are lurking, so we'll go to Charles.
I was lurking.
Okay.
I put it in the text channel.
All right, no worries. Thanks, Charles. All right, let's go to Dan.
Okay, two things. I'm starting to work on ESP32 Bluetooth code, and Lady Ada wanted to get that working on the MetroM for Airlift. And I started working on it, but I got sort of stuck, and she was already zooming ahead, and she got it working over the weekend. So thank you very much, Lemore. And then thanks, Scott, for last Tuesday, we had a wide-ranging talk about a whole bunch of different aspects of BLE stuff. So thank you for that. Okay.
Thanks, Dan. All right, next up, we have Dave P. Dishipu and D. Harada lurking, so we'll go to Foamy Guy.
Right. I'm going to start this week actually with a related hug that I forgot to mention last week for Summersoft for working on the documentation pages, specifically the out-of-date warning, trying to make that a little bit more visible. So I forgot to mention that last week, but I definitely really appreciated it. This week to Jeff for helping me get the build process for the docs figured out so that I could work on some PRs that had failing docs builds. And then to Caps Lock for the virtual pet sort of like Tamagotchi device thing that they have set up. That thing's really cool. So thanks for sharing that. To Dishipu, I noticed an issue with U-Game buttons, and Dishipu got that fixed. I appreciate that. And then lastly for me, just a group hug to everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Foamy Guy. All right, next up we have Hierophect.
I forgot where I didn't put this down, but it's the last minute one that I actually just thought of. Thanks to Joey Castillo for his work on the open book. I just put one of those together last week.
Awesome.
And it's a really cool device. He's done a bunch of work on making Unicode fit in a small amount of flash, so that you can actually put it on a NOR flash chip. And in general has just done a whole bunch of neat stuff regarding different languages and Python. So I'm interested in getting to work with that. And then a group hug to all of them.
Awesome. Thanks, Hierophect. All right, Jacob and Jason are lurking, so let's go to Jeff.
Hello. A group hug because everybody out there is wonderful, but also specifically to Geek Guy for your continued contribution to CircuitPython and for working on the newsletter, Anecdata, and Help for CircuitPython for a helpful conversation about temperature sensors. To Jerry in advance for checking out a problem I ran into on the AHT20 sensor. I may just have one that is a bum sensor. I'm not sure yet. To Fiddy2 for the Spanish translation of CircuitPython. It will be exciting to see that one come up to 100% real soon as well. And to Lady Ada for another helpful conversation trying to get me unstuck on SDIO where I was stuck for about 2 weeks. And I think we're past that now. So
Great.
Anyway, yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. All right, next up, we have notes from Jerry, who says group hug, and Katney.
All right, so this week I have a hug for CJC for their contribution of a modified animation to the LED animations library. They submitted a new animation and examples to go with it, and it's really nice. To Crayola for continued work on the LED animations library. To Foamy Guy for documentation fix and for always reviewing PRs. To Alvaro for translating the CircuitPython Essentials Guide. The translation is currently in moderation and they are ready to pick up another guide. So we will have, once that is done, we'll have 2 fully translated Spanish guides and a third one being worked on. To Dan for helping me make a decision regarding a PR review. To Jeff for a lovely conversation last week and for handling a moderation issue reported directly to me while I was not available to deal with it. And to the community moderators in general for handling everything that's been coming our way.
Awesome. Thank you, Katney. All right. KJW is lurking, so we'll go to Maker Melissa.
Hello. I wanted to give a hug to the community moderators for dealing with a lot more spam and unruly folks than usual lately. A hug to Adafruit for recognizing Juneteenth. And Anne for adding my scrolling LED matrix sign to the newsletter, and a group hug to everyone.
Awesome. Okay, we have Mark and Obvious Ollie lurking, so let's go to Summersoft.
Hello. So one more for the moderators. We do keep getting some unsavory joins, and everyone just kind of keeps rolling with the punches. For all the streaming, like all of it. Lady Ada, Phil, you, Scott, Nina Zankarico, doing Python T now, and it just, I think it all really helps in our continued isolation. So thanks for that. And then a group hug.
Awesome. Thank you, Summersoft. All right. Next up, we have status updates. We do it in a similar way where we do a round robin, but this time we're talking about a bit about what we've been working on and what we plan on working in the coming week. This is a great chance for people to just like give tips and tricks about the work that folks are going to be doing, or if they hit a bug or a problem, getting kind of cross-pollination between folks and understanding what's going on. So same rules apply. Let us know if you're lurking, if you just joined in. I don't think anybody has. But you can also double check in the notes doc just to make sure as well. All right. And I will start. I just got excited because in the notes doc, Stargirl's reports are right before mine, and she will be on Python T this week, which I'm excited about. And I'm already behind on Python T, so I've got to do that as well. Okay. 29:38. For me, I made good progress on sketching out the SPI support, but we'll actually need to compile it and test it this week. The implementation highlights the memory management issues with having two different allocators, the IDF and CircuitPython itself. We'll try and focus on the bare minimum necessary for bus I/O because that's been a long time coming. I plan on streaming on... Oh, my stream on Friday talked through many of the trade-offs, and I need to get back into the headspace so I can do it on Tuesday. So you kind of want to know the details of that. I talked it all through on Friday. And then hopefully this Friday on my stream, I'll be able to show that it's all working. Over the weekend, I made really, really good progress on electioncal.us, which is kind of my... that's true. My stream last time was on Thursday, Jeff. Oh, yeah. Apparently it's like a long weekend style for me. But yeah, got lots of election cal stuff done over the weekend, and I played a lot of Age of Empires 2 as well. So definitely feeling that I've got more headspace. So I'm looking forward to finishing up Bus IO this week. And with that, let's go to V923Z.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So about a week ago, someone popped a question on GitHub asking whether we could add recursive filters to Microlab, and it turned out to be an excellent suggestion. And I had to read a lot of background material, which is not particularly spectacular, but I had to do that in order to be able to pull off the code. I have just merged that, and in the coming week, I will try to see if filter design functions could be added in a meaningful way, and I think that would be also awesome, because then you could design functions on the filters on the fly. And I think that would open new possibilities. I would like to point out here that the other type of functions, or the filter functions, are the non-recursive functions that were the first contribution of Jeff to Microlab. I think that was also a great addition, and that was also a turning point in how Microlab is developed. So thanks again for that, Jeff. I think that was a terrific contribution.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, next up we have Brent.
Just reading HyroFX notes, and I'm jealous he got an open book. I've seen them in person, and they're way smaller than you expect. I didn't order one yet. Much smaller than you expect. I've been working on learning protocol buffers this last week for a project I'm working on. I might be looking at writing a protobuf library for CircuitPython. I like how the compiler that Google wrote, they have a compiler that can create Python modules with like built-in methods and classes from like .proto files, and I would love to mimic that because I really like the flow of generating the file and then bringing it straight onto the CircuitPython file system. Could also add it into CircuitPython, but I haven't done much research or implementations about this at all. It's just a thought I'm working with. And then I'm moving next week, and I won't be on that much. And the IoT monthly newsletter also comes out next week. That's about it.
Nice. All right, good luck moving, Brent.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Carter, C. Grover, and Charles are looking, so let's go to Dan.
Okay, so one minor thing. Some people have been seeing a problem with microcontroller.cpu.voltage. They would try to use it, and it would just hang. And I thought this was strange because I had implemented it and it worked. And so I tried it on one board and it worked, and I tried it on another identical board and it didn't work, which means that it varies based on the sample of the chip, which is terrible. So after trying a few things, I found that if I just put in a slight delay before trying to use the ADC in this case, it works. And it's peculiar. It's not, it has to do with the ADC in this particular function or something, or the voltage reference thing from the supply controller inside. It's sort of terrible, but it's fixed. Then another thing is that we've had an issue with has had a lot of discussion about how do we handle brownout when your battery runs down, and then if your board comes back up, you don't want it to be in safe mode because it's in a cabin somewhere or on a dock or something like that. So I tried one thing. I set up the logic to specify that you don't want it to go in safe mode, and I tried to store that state in RAM, but it turns out that, and I just moved the voltage up and down with a knob, and it didn't work well because the RAM location disappears, the information there. So I think we have to store this state in Flash, and I'll work on that at some point. It's not extremely urgent, but I understand the problem better now. And then finally, the main thing that I'm doing is that I'm re-implementing BLEIO _BLEIO third time, and that is we're going to use something called the HCI, which is the host controller interface, which is a serial protocol interface that's used. It's pretty universal in the Bluetooth world. Like your typical Bluetooth dongle uses that to talk to the host computer, or the host computer uses it to talk to the dongle. And you can put HCI firmware on the ESP32, not the ESP32S2 yet, just the ESP32. And we have that already on breakouts and various boards, including the Metro Airlift. So I will re-implement BLEIO so you can now do Bluetooth from an M4 board when I get done with that. Or any board that can just talk serial to one of these things. Okay.
Yeah, super exciting. Thanks, Dan. All right, Dave Deshipu and Diharada are lurking, so let's go to Foamy Guy.
Right. So this week I was continue working on adding support to different devices for the PyBadger library. I got the Pew M4 completed this week. Although I do need to go back and check on something actually in the image load library. I've forgotten I made a small change in there a long time ago to get it to work on my Pew. And I'm not sure if that ever got merged in, so I need to double check. But I do have the PyPortal and the Pew working on my devices, and there's a PR out there if anyone is interested in taking a look at that. I also started working this weekend on something I've been thinking about for a little while. It's a system that will let us define layouts in JSON files, and then you can store that file on your device, and then you'll have a little bit of Python code that will read the file and then render it as all the layouts onto the screen. And it's kind of the very, very, very early stages of what we'll need for some sort of drag and drop layout editor. So I got pretty good progress on that. Right now it's supporting the text labels, the images from image load, and also the on-disk bitmaps. But still lots of work to do there. A couple other things I was working on is just testing out a couple of LED animations PRs, as well as doing some other reviews over the weekend. And then the last thing that was kind of on my mind this week is I'm starting to brainstorm some ideas for a text input module. So like if you imagine old school video games, how they have for the high score or something like that, you have kind of a grid of letters, and then keypad control that lets you move a function around and then hit A or something to put it up in the selected text box or whatever. So if anybody has ideas on how to implement something like that in CircuitPython, I am all ears because I'd love to get something like that going for high score boards in CircuitPython games. But yeah, that's all I got this week.
Awesome. Thanks, Foamy Guy. My brain was just thinking about that. I was like, what if it wasn't just a fixed keyboard, but it actually was like based on like letter frequency? So like after you have the first letter, then the next letter is like the thing that we think is most likely, that sort of thing. That might be too confusing. All right, let's go to Hierophect.
All right, so this past week, my goal was to tackle a whole bunch of bugs and knock off a bunch of issues, and unfortunately, they all ended up being a little bit harder than I thought they were going to be. So I ended up making some new issues, knocked off a couple of like really, really easy things. But otherwise, I worked on trying to get the IMX 1050 in, which didn't really work out because the EVK, the evaluation board, is giving me trouble. I put together a control for the RGB matrix, which I would like to eventually get supported on the F7 and H7, but unfortunately that's not really working either. And tried to work on a memory issue that we still haven't pinned down. So in general, things were not super productive. But I did get to put together my open book, which I'm very happy with, and have lots of ideas about stuff I want to experiment on with that. So that was a nice little way to round out an otherwise kind of frustrating week.
Mm-hmm.
This week, I'm going to just kind of put the bugs on hold for a little bit and go back to allocator system for the STM32. STM32s have timers that they share across a bunch of different modules. And right now, they kind of like hoard their own little supply of timers and they don't let anybody else have it. And we're running out of timers for the number of modules that we want to support. So I got to write something that's going to let all these modules kind of negotiate what timers they get and deliver that information to the user somehow, because we're probably going to start cutting into user timers. And I don't know, but it should be an interesting project and definitely going to be a little bit less frustrating than some of these kind of wacky off-the-wall bugs. So on that, I'm also going to be moving back or preparing to move back to Boston. So I'll be in and out this week, but time I'm not being in apartments, I will be spending on CircuitPython. So
awesome. Thanks, Higher Effect. Good luck with finding an apartment.
Yeah, it should be a little easier than it normally would be because of COVID, actually.
Yeah, hopefully. You might have to move yourself, though. I know I at least had one set of neighbors that, like, none of the moving companies at the time were doing it, so they had to do it all themselves.
I don't have too much stuff, so
that's good. All right. Jacob T and Jason P are lurking, so let's go to Jeff.
Last week, as some of you know, I was mostly stuck on the SAMD51 SDIO work. At the end of the week, I got a SAM E54 explained board, which is the development kit for a very similar sibling chip to the SAMD51, and ported CircuitPython to it. The main reason I did that is because it has an SDIO card slot built in and wired properly and some pull-ups. And so this week, I got unstuck on SDIO this morning using that board. So yay, that paid off. I think the problem was the lack of pull-ups, but it could have been the quality of my wiring, because I also had some problems just when I would probe the signals with my Salier logic analyzer, it would stop detecting the card. So it's obviously not got a lot of headroom for these signals to be communicated. Anyway, this week, I need to start working on cleaning up that code, and then I've got some other PRs that need to be merged ahead of that. So maybe more organizational than writing new code, but that is a fine change of gear. My fun stuff that I'm up to is making a temperature and humidity logger. It shows the high and low that it is seen on the little Feather OLED screen. And because I switched that to having the STM32 Feather in it with the SDIO SD card, I will be using that code when I go ahead and add logging soon. So that will loop back around and be related to what I'm doing right now.
Awesome.
That's what I got.
Thanks, Jeff. All right. Next up, we have notes from Jerry. Jerry says, working on reducing the code size of the RFM9X library. Goal is to freeze it into builds for the Feather M0 RFM9X, working for most language builds, but some of the larger translations are not fitting yet. Stumbled across the issue with Pulse.io not working for the DHT library on the M0 board since 5.3. I was hoping to be able to omit Pulse.io from the Feather M0 RFM9X build and still use DHT sensors via Bitbang. Not working yet, but also found that it does not work with Pulse.io either, so I'm not sure if there's an underlying problem. Pulse.io is okay on the M4 boards. The DHT sensor has been problematic before, and there are so many better options, but since it's popular and inexpensive, it would be nice to be able to use it with this board. Plan to continue with the RFM 9X code reduction next week. That's from Jerry. And next up we have Katney.
All right, so last week I published a guide for 9DOF combo boards. We have a series of boards that have accelerometer, gyro sensors, and magnetometer sensors, like 2 sensors on a single board, and they all run pretty much off the same code, though there are some pinout differences between them. So we did a guide that involves 3 boards together. And I did a bunch of miscellaneous, going through GitHub issues, going through PRs, got some PRs merged, some GitHub issues fixed up. And this week, right now, I'm working on fixing a bug in some code in a Learn guide that I wrote. We updated the LED animations library API, and I had forgotten that we actually had a project that was using it. So I got the code running, but now I'm finding other bugs. So I'm not sure if it's bugs in the code or bugs in the animations library, or it's possible that we just changed how things work and I just have to figure that out. So finding bugs in the LED animation library and filing issues is the next thing on my list. I will be adding, there's a 4th board that's a 9DOF combo board. It's a featherwing, so there'll be 2 featherwings and 2 breakouts in that guide. I need to add the new featherwing to the guide. So there'll be 4 boards total. I'm going to be going through open PRs, specifically testing the PyBadger PR, since I created that library, made sense for me to take a look at it. I'm going to be verifying that all the appropriate libraries are on PyPI. I know Melissa's been going through and testing display libraries, but I want to make sure that now that we have display.io support, that everything that should be is on PyPI. So make sure nothing got missed. And then I'm going to be writing a guide for the 74HC595, which is a little chip that lets you control 8 LEDs with 3 wires. We have it, and we never did a guide for it. It's been on my list for almost 2 years, and it's decided now would be a good time. So that is the next thing on my list. I'm working with Alvaro on translating the next guide. The next guide will be a project guide, and then after that, the Circuit Playground guide. So that'll be really good. And that's what I got.
Awesome. Thanks, Katney. All right. Mark is lurking. Where am I? KJW is lurking, so let's go to Maker Melissa.
Hello. So last week I worked on a few GitHub issues regarding displays. I wrote a script for calibrating 9DOF sensors just by running it on the Raspberry Pi from the command line. I wrote a guide page for using the above script, and I wasn't feeling very well near the end of the week, so I didn't get as much done as usual. This week I am starting working on a Blinka PyPortal port to allow scripts written for the PyPortal to run on Blinka. And whatever else comes up. And then for other projects, I finished working on building a scrolling LED message board. And I wrote a complete library for the message board to allow easy scripting and animating it, and that's all run in Python.
Awesome. Thanks, Maker Melissa.
Thanks.
All right. Pink Vampire, do you have a status update, what you're working on? I know you just
I'm totally not in kind of programming and stuff like that. I'm a machinist, so obviously my thing are not programming. I just built a pretty cool mini height gauge, but it's totally not related to any of your programming and
That's okay. I know you do awesome machinery stuff. It's just impressive.
Yeah, it was just stuff laying around at my house, so I kind of decided to put it together.
Yeah.
I can post the pictures if you want. I don't know if it's even related. I don't know if this can be checked.
Yeah, a picture would be great. Yeah.
In what channel to put it?
In the CircuitPython channel.
This is my
Awesome.
little height gauge.
Ah.
It's all high stiffness aluminum parts. The 2024 T3, I believe. And it's kind of cool little 2.5 inches mini height gauge that is pretty cool if you need to kind of take measurement for reverse engineer difficult part and you don't want to go to the CNC machine just to probe it. It's kind of cool, tiny tool.
Awesome. Well, good work.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Thank you, Pink Vampire, for the machining update. And lastly, or not lastly, we'll go to Summersoft.
Hello again. Last week with RosiePi, I completed the refactor to utilize PyTest, and it's now working on a test node. So if you'd like to see an example of the output, you can find it at that link. That was basically all last week. I did update my open PR for the USB VID PID duplicate checker. I'd used whitelist as one of the roving variables, so I changed that to ignore list, just kind of with what we've been doing as far as using terminology. So I went ahead, I had the thought, and I was like, you know what, it's an easy update. So I went ahead and updated that.
Cool.
Obviously, that PR will stay open for a while until we get the actual VID and PIDs deconflicted. But
right.
So, and then for this week, I'm not really sure. I've kind of come to the realization that I need to come up for air from RosiePi. I've been working on it for over a year now, which kind of shocks me. That's probably the longest I've ever worked on a single project. So I started to look into some of the issues that have been left open on Adabot, and I couldn't focus and dig on anything. So I'm going to try and do that again this week, but we'll see.
Yeah. You could also come up from air from CircuitPython as well.
Yeah, fair, but then I'm still just kind of in the same position. So
yeah, that's what Age of Empires is for me.
Oh, I do plenty of other stuff. I play plenty of Destiny. So
nice, awesome, cool.
But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Summersoft. I appreciate everything you do. All right, last up we have notes from Stargirl. Stargirl says, publish the source code and the hardware designs for the Hostess Feather Wing at the link that somebody hopefully will drop in the comments. And also, Stargirl says, this Friday I'll be on Nina Zakharenko's Python Tea, and we'll chat about CircuitPython stuff, which is at twitch.tv/NNJAIO. So check that out. Carol Willing, who's a friend of ours, was on that last week, so I'm excited to go back and watch that as well. Thank you, everybody. That was status updates. We have one more section to go, and that section is In the Weeds. In the Weeds is a section for kind of longer term discussion and stuff. And I'm going to hand it over to V923Z, and then I'm going to write in a topic I want to talk about.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I seem to hijack the weeds each time I participate in the weekly meeting, but
that's what it's
I
for.
do have questions. Okay, so the first question I would like to ask is about the documentation. Based on Jeff's pointers, I looked at the Adafruit stuff or the CircuitPython stuff, and I am actually sold on the idea that that the documentation there should in some way be part of the Microlab project, because I think these very terse and short documentation snippets are extremely useful, and I would love to integrate that into Microlab. Now, the question is, how do we do this? Because the thing is, if I put this in my code, or, well, I hate to say this my code, but in any case, if you move it over there, it doesn't matter where it is exactly, whether it's in the code itself or it's in a separate folder, it doesn't matter. The question is, well, there are two questions. So it should be done in a way that that you can incorporate that in the CircuitPython documentation with a single click, or without having to fuss about scripts that sometimes run, sometimes don't run, and so on and so forth. And I think the directory structure that you have, that's what you work with. So I could just prepare the documentation in that format. That's not the issue. The issue is that the documentation should be verified before I actually issue a pull request, and that means that I have to somehow compile the documentation into something that I can look at. But obviously, I would like to do that without all the Adafruit or the CircuitPython stuff, because that's actually huge. So the question is, if you see a way out of this loophole, or, well, so what would you suggest? What would be your approach? Because I think the main problem is that, and I'm sorry for this, but this is the situation, that I think Microlab is the only external project that you really integrate into CircuitPython,
right.
And you don't have total control over what's happening there, and it breaks the I wouldn't say that your code is monolithic, but it's definitely a single entity that you have control over. And I see that Microlab breaks that, and we have to somehow facilitate this back and forth between the two projects.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I see only difficulties, but perhaps there's a single and a 5-second solution that you have on top of your head. And if it's so, then I would like to hear that.
Well, first I want to say, like, working with you as being the first person to have a project that we integrate has been wonderful, right? Like, I for any project that we integrate like this, like, you've been as responsive as any maintainer could be. So, like, don't apologize for being that first person, because it's been awesome.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, but I think the emphasis was somewhere else. Obviously, I don't want to create extra hurdles for you, because that would be unfair, and I don't see any reason for that. So if we do this, then we have to do it in a way that actually eases your life, instead of making it harder. So again, you stick with this directory structure. That's fine with me. I have no problems with that. But before I bother you about the pull requests and so on and so forth, then I would like to see whether the documentation that I have on my side actually compiles. Because I think it would be really annoying that you started to compile the whole stuff, and then it slips up on Microlab.
Yeah,
that would be stupid.
Well, I think what I would encourage you to do it inline in your C code, just like we do.
That's absolutely no problem.
But that's up to you. Like I think that's just a better practice.
Yeah, I have no problems with that. We can do that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you extract these comments from the code, and that's what becomes your documentation.
Right.
But it still has to be verified.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways you can verify it. Like the code that you extract is CircuitPython or is Python stubs. So there is I forget the name of the project, but there's a thing that
I
will
think
just
that's
like
Sphinx
syntax verify.
fragments, right?
Say that again.
I think that's just Sphinx fragments or restructured text.
Well, so the stubs now are actually proper Python stubs. So I would encourage you to actually release it as a Python stub package.
Okay.
So that that way people can use it in their editors for autocomplete, which is the reason that we switched over.
Okay.
And there is I looked, I'm blanking, but we have a helper script that Dylan and I kind of collaborated on that just loads it up and verifies that the syntax of those stub files are correct. And then what I would do is also I would suggest setting up your read the docs and Sphinx build to use those files for your API documentation.
Okay.
And that is the same build process that we will use, but in the like monolithic sense, as you're saying. But if it works for you for your read the docs build, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work for ours.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I didn't know about that, but if you are confident, then let's try that.
Yeah. I don't think it'll be a problem.
Okay. The second question is, I think it's a more general question, whether people would be interested in benchmarks. And I linked an example here. That's Jeff's intro to Microlab, and I think that was interesting. Obviously, Jeff compared two implementations, or actually three. One of them was the Python only implementation, and then the other one was Microlab. And obviously, I'm not going to implement everything in Python just for the sake of, just for the heck of it. I think it's so. I wrote the FFT code in C because in Python it doesn't make sense, and so I think the comparison part I could leave out, but still the question is whether people want to know what an FFT costs, or if they simply think that, well, it's just fast enough for me, I don't care. And obviously, if you want to have benchmarks, then well, you have a lot of boards that you support, and I have only two, I think, at the moment. So if people are interested in benchmarks, then somehow it has to be a bit coordinated, and people would have to chip in. Although, on the other hand, perhaps it's fair to say that the benchmarks will scale with the frequency. I don't think that there are orders of magnitude differences between two chipsets, two chips running at approximately the same frequency. But I don't know that. I think one would have to see it. So, in any case, it's a very general question. I think that's not only for you, but for the community as a whole.
Yeah, I think my perspective on benchmarks is one of a huge grain of salt. I think a lot of times benchmarks are misused. Like, for example, I was at the Open Hardware Summit and somebody had this chart of like which board is fastest. And I was just like, it's not about that, right? So
right. But I can tell you the background. So I started on to work on Microlab because I needed a fast FFT.
Right.
And for me, it was important that it can be done in 2 milliseconds instead of 10.
Right.
That was on a Pi board. Right. So in that sense, I really needed that benchmark. But on the other hand, I see your point that these are misleading. On the other hand, there are, so for example, for the FFT, people usually take or at least in the past used to take the 1024 point FFT and then put it on different pieces of hardware and then see how fast it goes.
Right.
But I'm not pushing this idea. It was really just with a huge question mark. I don't know if it's useful or interesting or people are, or whether people care about it. Hence the question.
Yeah, I think in specific cases, so Jeff points out in the chat that benchmarks could be valuable in order to let us notice whether there has been a regression. And I think that's totally true. I think that in limited cases, in the FFT case that you're talking about as well, they are very valuable. But I do worry in the like broad, like let's run this benchmark on all these boards sorts of things. And another example that makes me wary that I have is like Micropython has a series of benchmarks that I can point you to, but they're very like kind of specific. And like there's this issue that we ran into where there's like a worst case with a tight loop where the tight loop is allocating 2 block pieces of memory, not 1 block pieces of memory. And like it like hits this like really terrible performance case. But the fix takes a little bit of performance out of their existing benchmarks, and so they like waffled for months on. I don't think they fixed it still.
Okay.
But clearly there's this case that's like way worse that we should pay the cost for.
No. So if your argument is that it can be misinterpreted very easily, then let's drop it. Then I haven't even asked it.
I mean, it's fine to ask it. And I think as Jeff points out, and you're pointing out as well, like for specific cases, it's the tool you need. But I think broadly, it's largely an unhelpful tool.
Okay, fair enough.
But people can people can say otherwise as well.
No, that's fair enough. So I think we can move on. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, last up, I wanted to talk about Jeff made an open pull request to rename I2C-slave, and there's a lot of discussion on that pull request about what we should rename it to. And because it is a rename and it will cause a major version number bump, I want to make sure that we kind of all agree on what the name is. And I don't see us coming to a conclusion in that PR, so it's just gonna... Like, I think where I'm at is I would prefer for both I2C and SPY to just call a host and a device. And then I know we have this problem with both the MIMO labels and the MOSI MISO labels of SPY. And I think that the way that we can explain that is main input, main output. And for the S's, I like actually the suggestion from, I think it was Don. Like I was suggesting calling it shared output, shared input. But I think actually selected was what I think Don suggested. And I think that makes a lot of sense given that we have a chip select line. So that's a way to like tie the names all together that I think selected is a good one. So my proposal would be that what Jeff renames I2C-slave to would actually be I2C device, which does also risk the idea that some confusion with bus device, which is not necessarily a great thing, but it's in the same sense of Bluetooth where like you're being an I2C device from like two sides, right? So like bus devices from the outside, you're talking to a I2C device, and I2C device in CircuitPython is you being an I2C device. So I think that's okay.
What did you think of I2C peripheral?
I2C peripheral?
Yeah.
I was only thinking peripheral for SPY because SPY is the serial peripheral interface.
Yeah, but I2C, so I2C host and I2C peripheral. Because there are no acronym, there are no...
Right. I mean, maybe it's just a little clearer.
SDA and SCL S's.
Right. So serial data and serial clock.
Right. But I mean, we always say like, oh, this is I mean, there's this sort of jargon thing like that. The chips have peripherals, but that's just microcontroller speak. But in general, you would say, like, oh, this breakout board, that's an I2C peripheral. That's an I2C device. I guess either one is fine. Like, what's on this humidity sensor board? Oh, that's an I2C device.
Right.
That's
my
probably
perspective on the naming was kind of coming from perspective of somebody who's designing. I'm designing a number of boards, right now, which I would like to have running CircuitPython ultimately.
Right.
And I'm like actively concerned that, I'm worried about kind of basically maintaining compatibility with CircuitPython while maintaining compatibility with, like the rest of the world, right? So that people, because they're ultimately going to be boards that are aimed at newcomers, and I worry basically about having. I think from my perspective as somebody who hasn't really launched any bots before, I don't have a lot of clout. I don't have like a full company behind me. I don't think I could make a acronym breaking name change on my own. I just don't. I don't think I could actually pull it off, right?
Right.
And so, I don't know. My perspective, in general, I don't really see the advantage. While I understand the host peripheral technical accuracy, I don't really see the advantage when we have good, like you said, we have pretty good. I think that main and selected is about the best name that's come up so far. It's pretty accurate. I feel like the advantages to keeping that consistent, having everything use main selected, getting to have just one explanation of why we made the change. It doesn't have to be made multiple times for different cases. I just think that makes the most sense. That's my personal view.
Right. So you like the idea of the wire naming matching the naming of the devices themselves.
Yeah, I like the idea of just using main and selected. I think selected is better than secondary. I like the idea of just using main selected for everything.
For both I2C and SPI is what you're saying.
I think it still works basically for I2C because it indicates I2C is also a bus that only runs one thing at a time.
Right.
And even if it's using an address system, it doesn't have the select line. It is still a selected device by virtue of the address that is sent. It still makes sense to me that a main device has selected devices reporting to it. So I think honestly, like, I don't know, my preference would be to keep it simple, but that's just.
I think that's really interesting because I'm thinking back to the stream I did a few weeks ago where I was explaining the difference between all of them, and it was like, the idea that you select a device between I2C and SPI is accurate. Like, they just have different approaches to how they select it. I think that's kind of interesting.
Well, they self-select. I mean, I2C, they're listening all the time, and they're good citizens. Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, if you say the idea is, well, it used to be M and S and in the I2C world also, and so now it's still M and S, that's fine. It's just there weren't any board labels that in the I2C world that use M and S.
Right.
It's only in the documentation. And I think
I haven't objected to the other.
I mean, I think if you just put the explanation in parentheses, like selected parenthesis device, comma, peripheral, or something like that.
Yeah.
Anybody who would be able to figure it out.
I mean, chances are you're going to explain it with, like, if you have a sentence for what the selected is, you're going to explain it using the word peripheral or device.
Yeah. I will say, I also spent like about half an hour with a bunch of thesaurus websites, and I didn't come up with any other M and S words that were better. So,
I really liked manager and subordinate, but I guess those are just clunky. I felt like a lot of my devices kind of have this boss employee kind of relationship where they're delivering data to each other, but they're still peers.
Right.
It's kind of peer to peer, but I think main selected is.
So does it make sense for us to have an I squared C selected class though? Like, I think that's where it's like a little weird.
C selected is a little.
I think that I2C device is fine for that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really mind I squared C device because, you know, basically, like, all of this is really just for SPI because that's the one that has the label.
Okay.
I'd say that I squared C device. Honestly, I squared C list and IList stuff. I would just say kind of use whatever is the best. Like,
well, isn't this issue really in the case of CircuitPython? It's in the bus when you create the bus, you know, in bus IO.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only time that the the named pins are even mentioned.
Right.
When you create the device, when you create the initial
bus,
not when you create the device, because the device already knows about that. And
I think that the naming convention,
that's the only place that it becomes a serious issue. You do need a selected, whether you're doing I2C or not, because basically it's just what is the method of selection. In I2C, it's you supply an address. In SPI, you actually use a pin.
Right.
I think that I would say let's just use host device or whatever you want to do for I squared C, and if you follow my suggestion, it would be main selected for I squared C, or for SPI.
For explaining MOSI and MISO.
Just for just explaining that. I mean, you know, I think it's much more relevant in terms of how these terms are discussed in tutorials and documentation than the actual itself. We're really just laying the outline for how guides are going to work and setting the standard for that. So my preference would be that we don't have two parallel terms for SPI. I would rather just be main selected. That's great. And that's kind of all I have to say.
So I like the selected approach. As I mentioned in the stream last week, you know, using shared, I pointed that out that, you know, it kind of glosses over you're pointing to a device, whether it be SPI, you know, clock select, or you know, I2C is a little bit more implicit with the address, but as Jeff just pointed out, I think the bigger issue is the I2 slave library
rename. Yeah.
If you rename that to I2C device, then you've already got that in bus device as a class object. So what would you change that to?
Is peripheral on the table for I squared C, an I squared C peripheral?
I mean, I think Dan put it on the table, and I don't disagree with it. It's just, you know, it's as with this topic, I think everybody's having, you know, there are so many different little wrinkles to the whole subject when you start talking about these names that we've been using for 20, 30 years.
Right, there's a kind of an element of bike shedding here. A little risky, but I think.
Yeah, and I should also say that I'm not against us referring to master and slave as in like in the documentation, maybe in the developer guide, we'd say it used to be called master, it used to be called slave. Like it's okay for us to explicitly say that, so that people who are like not understanding the mapping, I think it's okay for us to say those as like these are the terms that used to be popular or are popular outside of our space. Like, I think it's okay for us to do that when we're explaining it, because then we can also explain why we don't use that. The multi-master stuff is interesting because you could just like do multi-main potentially.
I think multi-main makes more sense than multi-master though.
Yeah. Yeah, and Deshipu, I think if you want to change clock to SCK, like, I guess, yeah. It actually doesn't matter that much because I don't think it's keyword arg. Maybe it is. It's an optional keyword arg. Okay, so what I'll do today is I will do a final like pitch on it. Like I actually, it doesn't bother me too much that I2C device is something that is in bus device as well.
It doesn't sound too crazy to me either.
Like,
yeah, I think bus device is actually more, but it doesn't really matter. It's most people don't see that, so
yeah, and
well,
most people won't
use
I2C slave either.
Yeah,
Like,
it's a very
I2C
right.
device.
The number of people affected by this is pretty small.
And I think the reason I'm okay with the same name is I think it is like you're really doing the same thing from two perspectives, right? Like you're either implementing I2C device or you're talking to an I2C device. Like, it's kind of okay to me. It's just a matter of how you use it. Just like some of the BLE stuff, like you can end up being the client or the server depending on how you use it.
Your one problem with the I2C device thing, I think, is probably advertising that functionality exists, because I think it sounds possible to me that people would come in looking to see whether we have an I2C class and don't see any name for that, and then basically assume that it's not even there, right? So,
I'm not too worried about it because I don't think anybody's using it already.
So if I just look in Wikipedia, I2C, it says it's wisely used for attaching lower speed peripheral ICs to processors and microcontrollers. So the word peripheral, I think it's used as the word peripheral.
Okay.
Like if I just looked up some I2C devices.
I think that I would actually kind of prefer peripheral as well, because the more I think about it, the more I think of peripherals as being something that's attached to a host, because a device can just be anything. Like peripheral at least has the control relationship.
Yeah, it's more specific. Yeah, I like that.
It's on the periphery.
Yeah.
I would say,
yeah.
My end vote would be I2C peripheral, and then main.
I2C host, I2C peripheral. But for SPI, you'd like to do main and secondary. Or main and select.
Main and select would be my vote.
But selected only really applies to the wires. Because there are other devices connected to them that are not selected.
Yeah. Well, it says what the wires are used for, that they're used to send from the main to the selected device, right?
Right, which I like, but Higher Effect was arguing that we should use main and selected for terminology for the devices themselves too.
Selected, as in, it's confusing to refer to a device as a selected device as a classification, because they aren't selected all the time.
Right.
Secondary, I mean, if I don't like secondary as much, but I don't know, I care a lot more about keeping the acronym, and basically anything else. So yeah, if it has to make sense to me that secondary would be.
To me, I'm not like I think my vote would be host peripheral for both, for the device names, and then when we have documentation for what MOSI and MISO are, we say it's the main output with the selected input and the main output with the selected or whatever. Like, I think that we can use main and selected to describe and teach MOSI and MISO acronyms, but it doesn't have to match up with the fact that the main output of the wires is connected to the host, and the selected peripheral is connected to the selected output, selected input. Like,
well, I mean, I can only just provide what input I have, and it may be that I see the ultimate documentation and change my mind. So.
Yeah, we talked about manager and subordinate. Coming up with the S term, like that's what HireEffect was talking about, of like manager and subordinate. But I mean, manager and peripheral, like maybe we do a hybrid where the M means the same thing.
And just subordinate is subordinate.
Well, like basically it's a manager and peripherals and the manager IC and the peripheral ICs, and then the bus is manager in and out and the selected peripheral in and out.
Yeah, I think that sounds.
You think that's good?
I think you're just going to use it in a sentence, and that's okay.
I personally don't see anything wrong with saying just a subordinate peripherals or a subordinate peripheral. A subordinate device, a collection of services.
Yeah, I think the reason that I push towards host and device is like I think those are the terms that you actually use when you're talking about it. Like
it depends, because host and peripheral I think of as being technical. So for anybody who has at least some background in tech, they're not going to be an absolute beginner. I think they're not used to talking about things as hosts.
Well, it's the term in the USB world.
Right. Well, I think the problem with host is that the device, like if you use USB and SPI at the same time, device is a USB device and SPI host.
Right.
It can be confusing.
So where are we at?
Well, I think the only decision that you really have to make is what to rename I2C slave in terms of a name change.
Or SPI slave, rather.
SPI. What?
Well, no, we don't support SPI slave.
I would call it peripheral. Okay. I would call them both peripheral. If eventually we did SPI subordinates, I would call them an SPI peripheral.
Yeah, that sounds.
Because it if you just call it an SPI device, it doesn't. Peripheral distinguishes it more than calling it a device.
Right, because device you could apply to the host.
Right, and I don't think the P. I don't think the fact that the P in SPI peripheral is not an S makes all that much difference. I think the main thing is that you just want to use some alternate names when you're describing people how to wire things up in Learn guides. And so,
I don't know. I would say, like, what I would like to avoid is a scenario where we're pushing people to actually use different acronyms, because that's the point at which, like, I would actually have to reconsider how I make third-party boards, right? Or what I integrate.
I think you can still, it's the selected peripheral. I think you can still use NS, and people will understand how to wire it. I don't really think that's a problem.
Well, if we're going to have the two parallel names, I would just ask that they're both brought up, some equal frequency, so that people really are making that connection.
Yeah, but I think that people who need SPI peripheral support already understand it really well. Okay. It's not a beginner is not going to say, do you have SPI peripheral support?
I don't mean code. I mean, most people are not going to touch it in the code. I'm just saying, you know, in the terms of guides, so when we're writing a guide for an SPI device of any kind, I'm assuming that, you know, the Adafruit guides are going to follow the standard set by this decision.
Right. So that it would say like MOSI stands for main out selected in main means the microcontroller or the main device, and S means the selected SPI peripheral. And you just have to add a sentence for that. And that's all you have to say. So.
Well, you know.
And I think once people know that M is main, it doesn't really matter what the other one is because it's not main. So it's the other end. Yeah. So they don't really have to think about it.
And like feathers are only labeled MIMO. They're not actually, they don't even have the S on them.
Right. That would only, but it would come up for third-party devices.
Yeah. And it's actually interesting because a lot of our breakouts they aren't labeled for SPI because most of them are I2C. It's like, I don't think Adafruit has a lot of boards that are actually using those terms.
Or they have ambiguous pins like DS or something. There are a few ones that it depends on the device that it depends on how they recycle pins.
Sensor.
Yeah, sensor is.
Sensor's
if
gonna,
it's a display.
Sensor's going to cause lots of problems if it's not a sensor.
If it's not on a sensor, the guide was updated to read serial data in, serial data out.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's great. Okay. Yeah.
But they've already been updated. That's what they've been updated to.
Awesome. So
Scott, you could take this under advisement and let it think
I mean, like ultimately, like I have my own opinion. I don't know that we're going to necessarily come to a 100% unanimous decision here, but it's, you know, it sounds like Dan and then you have arrived on a thing, and I'm fine with it. I don't object to the scenario suggested. So
I think the broadest terms for MOSI and MISO are main and selected. Like the concern with microcontroller is that it doesn't really apply to Raspberry Pi that well, but that's a detail. Like I'm sure people who are just getting into Raspberry Pis can call it a microcontroller and be fine, like not have this like fundamental conundrum.
It's a microprocessor. It's a microcomputer.
Right. So I think, I think we should kind of just expect different ways of explaining it for MOSI and MISO. We don't have to have only one explanation of what it is, because they're really just mnemonics for remembering how to hook them up. Right. Like,
I think that like should be aiming to pick a consistent mnemonic for SPI MOSI and MISO. That's really the only thing that I think would be consistent about. And I think main and selected seems to be this one.
Yeah, I think in our docs we should put main and selected, and explain it as the selected peripheral. But to some degree, I think it's okay that people have different ways of remembering what MOSI and MISO mean. Like, because I think MOSI and MISO mean something on their own, regardless of how you remember like what it means. So, okay, I will follow up on that PR with a final recommendation. Which I think will be, instead of slave, we'll say peripheral. And we'll change the MOSI and MISO docs to say main and selected. All right. There's a reason I wanted to do this. I appreciate everybody sticking with me. And I'm going to wrap us up. So this has been the CircuitPython weekly meeting for June 22nd. Thank you, everybody, for sticking in the weeds here at the end. As a reminder for those of you, you don't have to listen to the whole thing. I know it ends up pretty long sometimes. This meeting was recorded along with all the other meetings. We post them to the Adafruit YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Adafruit. It also gets broadcast out to a bunch of podcast services. So if you're like me and like to subscribe, you should be able to do that as well. If you don't want to hear the whole thing, we do have a notes doc that is linked to from those sources. So if on YouTube, you can click the notes doc, and that will tell you all the time codes and stuff so that you can listen to the things that are of interest to you. And that's the deal. I think next week we're on a normal time schedule. If you want to get all of the pings and stuff about it, let us know. I just realized what that GIF was. You can join or ask to be added to the CircuitPythonista role. That means that you'll get pinged when we put the new notes doc up. And if we have to notify folks about a reschedule, we'll ping that role as well. That's about all it's used for. So if you want to do that, let us know. And that's the general gist. It's on the Adafruit Discord at the URL adafru.it/discord. It happens Mondays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. So if you're listening to this later and want to know when you can catch it live, that's when you can catch it live. And lastly, I think I might have said lastly already, but support Adafruit. They support a lot of us to work on CircuitPython. So you can go to adafruit.com. A lot of stuff's out of stock right now. We're working on that. But if something you would like to purchase is in stock, please do so, and we'll get it out to you as soon as we can. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Thanks, everyone.